This is a huge recording, man. It's crazy.
All right, welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram one more time in 2025. And it wouldn't be just if I didn't have my partner in crime with me, none other than Mr. Sandy Williams. Good morning to you, Sandy. How you doing?
Pretty good. I just got used to writing 2025 on a check when I write the check or whatever, and now I'm going to have to get used to 2026.
Sandy, you're still writing checks?
Well, not too many,
I
actually,
know. I
happily.
mean, I know. I don't think well, I think I use my check book maybe if it's 10 times in a year, that's a lot.
Well, you're a lucky man. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Well, so Sandy, let's have at it. Let's get right into it. Um, 2026 is around the corner, and people are having a tough go of it. I know people in the circles that I'm in are struggling mightily in a lot of different areas. Sandy, healthcare is clearly one. Rent is one. Food, the cost of food is one.
Cost of
Heating,
housing.
Sandy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
housing, the paying to rent the homes that they're in, and it just doesn't seem to be any way out. You and I were talking earlier, and government has to solve these problems. The people themselves can't solve these problems.
Well, the people can't. So some kind of system that's bigger than a person has to solve it. Whether the conservatives would say, well, don't have the government solve it. Let's let the marketplace solve it. But the marketplace doesn't solve anything overnight. And there are some who say, well, the government has to do it. It's interesting. 2025 was the name of this thing that was written in about 2023, which was the plan of the conservatives. Were they to win the election, what would they do in 2025? And most of what Project 2025 was aimed at was basically eliminating government regulation, cutting government down to a bare minimum, really attacking government directly, destroying much of it, and believing that by getting government out of the way, cutting out subsidies that were being given to people in order to enhance the affordability of day-to-day life, that somehow the marketplace would solve all these problems. But some of the aspects of the marketplace that are broken and will not work are, for instance, healthcare, where we have 20% of our GDP consumed by healthcare, and our healthcare system is not an open market system by a long shot. And the way it has been set up or organized and the architecture of it since World War II creates all the market incentives which go in the direction of making healthcare cost more. And it's interesting because the parties attack this question of affordability. I mean, affordability can be looked at from two different directions. Are things too expensive so you can't afford to buy them? Or is your income too small so you can't afford to buy the things that are out there in the marketplace? And the answer to affordability lies at both ends of those questions. Some things are too expensive. Education has become way too expensive in all likelihood, at least post high school education has. Healthcare has become way too expensive. And so what do we do about that? Child daycare has become inordinately expensive. All of this has to do with not only the availability of it, but the design of the systems that deliver it. And so the political debate about affordability has caused people to square off with taking the position either one, that things are too expensive and we ought to clear up the marketplace, or two, that people things are too expensive and people's income is too small and we need to subsidize their income. So the people on the one side that want to subsidize income would be looking at demand side solutions, And the people who think that you can solve all this by simply lifting regulation and and enhancing the production side are the supply side people. And you end up with conservatives being pure supply side, and the liberals being more or less pretty much lined up on the demand side of subsidizing those who have demand. When the solution to all of these issues undoubtedly lies on both sides. How do we enhance income so people can afford more? And how do we make the marketplace more efficient so that things don't get too expensive, particularly in, for instance, housing, healthcare, child daycare,
So
those
Sandy,
sectors.
the problem is the people who are having these discussions or will be having those discussions aren't including the people who need it the most. I
Well,
mean, you're talking about a system where right now they want to do all that they can to cut Medicaid because we're talking about subsidies. Well, subsidies are the things that they want to cut out because they say that on the Republican side, it's costing the wealthy too much money, and so we can't keep giving people, these handouts. And so what they're looking at Sandy's safety nets as being handouts.
Well,
We've
it's
got to
kind of
get
crazy.
beyond that.
Medicaid, the one you choose, is kind of crazy because by subsidizing the cost of medical care to the people who can't otherwise afford it, you're not going to promote them getting sick. It's not like people are now, oh, okay, now I can get sick because now I've got a subsidy for this. People are going to get sick whether or not they have the
Right.
subsidy. And then the question is, how does the healthcare system solve for providing them with healthcare? And so, in particular, I think the notion that subsidies associated with the Medicaid or Medicare is another subsidized system for the elderly, but it's available to everyone. Um, but the problem with the healthcare system is much more basic than Medicaid and Medicare. If we're going to solve there are two problems with healthcare. One is people don't make enough money to afford it, and two, it's way too expensive. And so, how do you solve those? Well, in the near term, you've got to make sure healthcare is available, which is definitely going to have to require subsidies. And in the very long term, you have to roll up your sleeves, do some work, and redesign how we deliver healthcare because the current system with third-party insurance payors and with the hospital systems as they're set up, the way they recover their costs, all the incentives in our system for the people who are participants in it is to increase the cost of healthcare. And so we don't have a system that has a marketplace type discipline built into it. And until Washington rolls up its sleeves and is willing to take on this industry that is 20% of the GDP, we're going to need to subsidize it because we aren't fixing the supply side of it by simply removing subsidies for those who can't afford it.
So, Sandy, the subsidies for healthcare, absolutely, it's got to be taken care of. But we're talking about child daycare. Okay, we can talk that. So people are looking at in the circles that I'm kind of traveling in. People aren't even thinking about the healthcare. They're thinking about how can I keep going to work if I got children just to keep a roof over my head. It's costing me too much money. I can't even afford to rent the place that I'm in. There isn't enough. I can't afford to put food on the table. And so Sandy, education and those kind of things, all those things seem people are seeing those things before they even get to healthcare.
I
So
know. Well, well,
why
healthcare.
aren't we addressing those things?
Well, why aren't we addressing them? That's a good
Yeah,
question. We aren't really addressing healthcare. I mean, the healthcare problem uh, is not going to be solved by an insurance subsidy program, or it's not going to be solved by continuing the existing insurance program. But until we roll up our sleeves and try and work on that, that's going to be the problem. These other issues, it really relates to what government has become responsive to, because what's happened in 2025, this year of 2025, is that people who are making the top 25%, the top 25% of the percentile income earners in this country are living the life of Riley. They have assets, they own houses,
Right, right.
they have retirement plans in which the stock market is soaring, and so their retirement plans are making them feel more affluent. Their houses are soaring in value, so they feel more affluent. And so they are prosperous, and they are the ones who are supporting the economy. People have analyzed where is the expenditure pattern in our economy, which is causing it to appear to be quite strong. And the answer is the top 25% income earners are supporting the economy and making it appear to be strong when the bottom 75% income earners are struggling. And they're struggling to have housing, they're struggling to have food on the table, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And that's really, I mean, if you want to summarize what it's like to be in the bottom 75% of income earners in this country, it's living paycheck to paycheck. And living paycheck to paycheck is not a way that you can accumulate savings or accumulate wealth. And if you don't own a house, you aren't going to accumulate wealth in this economy.
So Sandy, let's look at it from this perspective. Even that top 25%, and while they're living the life of Riley, do they think they're going to continue to live the life of Riley if the bottom 75% continue to struggle? I mean, they don't live on an island. They still live in a nation that incorporates and includes all of us. And even at the lower 75%, with whatever we're doing, working and doing the things that we're doing that help continue, sustain our nation, you can't just totally dismiss the 75%, Sandy, and say, well, good
Well,
riddance.
well, I would hope that the 25% think as you're saying, but I'm afraid that the maybe a prevailing sense for many of them now is let them eat cake.
Yes.
Marie Antoinette was said to have said that about the rabble who were outside the window of her castle or the palace. Uh, Let them eat cake. I'm afraid that the current posture of conservatives is that if we get government out of the way, if we impose tariffs so we restore manufacturing in this country, that incomes are going to go up and all these people are going to soar in income, and the middle class of America is going to begin to look much different. Maybe it'll look like the middle class in America in 1960, when the incomes of middle class America allowed one breadwinner to live the American dream with his family or her family. But the fact is that there's no indication whatsoever that the policies in place are going to do anything like that. And even if they are somewhat successful, this is a trajectory for our economy that will take decade or decades. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. And overnight is the kind of help that people need who can't pay their bills.
Sandy, what you just said is more than a mouthful. It represents a situation of dire straits for many Americans for decades to come. And I would venture to say to you, Sandy, that I can't foresee many Americans who are struggling daily. You can't tell me that if I've got a couple young children and I have to work and I'm working, and then there aren't enough decent daycare centers, and that's they're not going to pop up overnight. And even if you find them, they're going to cost you almost 40% of what it is you're working for. And these are people we're talking about, Sandy, who are working and doing all the right things, and they're struggling. So it's enough, Sandy, if we're talking about the lower rung of people who work at $10 an hour and work 30 hours a week because that's all they can get. I mean, there are all these different levels, Sandy, of suffering that are going on in a society that really kind of bring all of those different dynamics together that probably decades ago you wouldn't have saw the middle class you know, having a lot of things in common with the lower class. But now they kind of have some of the same things in common.
Well, yeah, and small business, which is the primary employer in this country, and is a big driver of conservative politics. Actually, small business people are very likely to participate in politics on the conservative side. Small business is being damaged quite a bit by in the current situation because they weren't really having significant difficulties because government was in their way. The government doesn't really get in the way of someone's HVAC, heating, ventilating, air
Right.
conditioning business, and so well, the beneficiaries of this Project 2025, sweeping regulations aside, has really been big business. And in many ways, it's looked a lot like crony capitalism. It's kind of big business who seem to have an entree to the president and to the administration, so that Apple escapes tariffs, but Tom, Dick, and Mary, small business that sells many products which are imported, has no capacity to avoid those tariffs and doesn't have a representative in Washington who can uh, pull the right levers and accomplish the waivers that are being accomplished for big business. So, the economists who are looking at this are saying, the people the businesses that are really beginning to thrive in the current environment are big businesses. Small businesses, based on the facts as they unravel associated with the current policies, small businesses are actually uh, kind of suffering materially, and and they are suffering along with that 75% of Tom, Dick, and Marys in this country who are in the lower 75% of income earners who are living very close to paycheck. Um, and so you know, what we need to do is I think we need to become much less dedicated to a particular ideology. Those who are on the supply side of thinking and who want to make sure that the supply side is as unfettered as possible so that people who manufacture things are not circumscribed and limited in their capacity by unnecessary government regulation. Okay, that's a sensible portrayal of what ought to be the case, but it's not the solution unless you look at the industry and decide that the industry has the capacity to cure itself given an open marketplace. And so, for instance, the healthcare industry. I mean, it is not going to fix itself. It needs to be redesigned, and it is an industry which is reliant on the government to design how it is that healthcare is paid for and how it's delivered. Um, and the same is true with education. And in many respects, it's true for child daycare. These kinds of things do need to be regulated. You don't want to commit your child to daycare in a place that's disreputable and unsafe. On the other hand, you want to make sure that it's available and affordable. Um, and, the same was true of education, and that's how we developed our public education system so that everyone could afford to have their child in a school.
So, Sandy, what people are hoping for is that during the midterms, that somehow the Democrats win, and so the hope is that if the Democrats win, all of this is going to turn around. It's not going to turn around immediately, even if the Democrats do win, Sandy. I mean, we're looking at, and you're a historian, we're looking at a time that this nation is faced with that there haven't been a whole lot of different times in our history that we've kind of been in a position where, this kind of problem, these kinds of problems um, aren't going to be able to be addressed without serious commitment and prioritizing these things over national defense, over, right now where the conversation is all about our nation working on trying to fix issues all over the world. The focus has to be on this nation. I hate to sound like, you know,
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
yes,
Yes, that's what she's saying.
But Sandy,
Well,
it's true.
I
I
know.
mean,
In fact, I think,
I'm not locking out the rest of the world, Sandy. But for heaven's sakes, man, you can't tell the American people like what's happening right now. You aren't important enough. Your family's not important enough. Come on.
well, I think on one of the very first shows I did with you a number of years ago, I talked about how it was that a democracy like the United States doesn't really have the capacity to have a strategic plan and to set about,
Right.
much like a corporation would,
I remember.
figuring out what the positives are, what the negatives are, what the challenges are today, tomorrow, and in the distant future. What's our vision? Where do we want to get? How do we get there? But it's what we need, really. We need the government, and our country needs to begin to examine itself, to look at its priorities, to look at its strengths, to look at its weaknesses, and to try and play to its strengths and to try and solve for its weaknesses. And part of that would be to reevaluate things like our general healthcare system. It can't be right. Spending 20% or more of our GDP on healthcare is not a sustainable trajectory for our economy. Having 75% of the people in the economy living paycheck to paycheck is the sign of a stagnating, over mature economy. So, yeah, we need to do some things to the architecture in this country of our economy and how it works. Are tariffs a good idea? It needs to be evaluated exactly the extent to which tariffs could be a good idea and the extent to which tariffs could enhance manufacturing. But I suspect that an equally good idea is to focus on training and education so that the people of this company are trained and educated to be committed to their professional careers, which will uh, enhance their lives and be a positive addition to the power of the American economy. And we aren't focusing anywhere near as much attention on education and training as we are on band-aid fixes like erecting tariff fences to try and solve for the competitiveness of American products.
Sandy, immigration still comes out as the number one subject. It's the number one thing apparently that Americans are still focused on. And I'm not saying that immigration isn't important, but for heaven's sake, Sandy, the way we've looked at immigration now is get rid of all of those people. Our nation is not going to be able to function if you got rid of, uh, you know, many of the people who are here in this country. We've got to get away from that. The immigrants are the ones that make it. It's the reason that your housing is costing you more than it should. It's the reason that your health care is costing you more than it should. It's the reason why,
Well,
the food stamps, and because all these immigrants, we got to get away from that.
well, I haven't seen polls that suggest that the American public believes that, but certainly the American public is being fed that
Right,
kind of a concept and
right.
being asked to believe that. But of course, the number of illegal immigrants in this country who own homes has to be a very small number, and it's not the factor that's driving up the cost of housing. And furthermore, small business, one of the ways that small business is being damaged is the fact that small business relies very much
Yeah,
on
immigrants.
immigrant labor as a
Right.
source of the capacity to do the things that small business does. So, if you are a drywall contractor and if you don't have access to immigrant labor, you've got a serious problem in today's economy. And it's one of the ways that small business is being damaged by the policies that are being implemented currently. And I think small business, the difference between the interest of small business and the interest of Apple and Amazon and Tesla and big business is like the difference between night and day. They have a completely different array of things that they worry about and need, and solving the problems for big business will not solve the problem for small business, and in some ways might damage small business.
Sandy, I guess there are people and so many people in this nation who don't even understand the business aspect of all of this, and they don't see a correlation. between business and all of those things uh, that that clearly have an interconnection to the everyday, situations that average Americans go through. They don't know that connection, Sandy, and all they know is this is not right. Okay, I'm how long are you expecting me to continue to go through this? If the Democrats get back in, there's this hope that they're going to be able to, you know, turn the switch, and all these things are going to change. Sandy, I guess I'm asking you something that I know you can't answer. How much pain are they continuing to ask the American people to go through? Because they haven't even begun to see the real pain that's still coming. Not just what's happening right now, Sandy, but there clearly are going to be some other levels of pain that the average American is going to have to go through before things get better. Is it safe to say that?
Well, I think, we've had a radical change in our government, and the radical change, I think, has rested upon the frustration of many, many people in this country with their lot in life and how things have progressed for them over the last 40 years. And these last 40 years have marked a significant, probably, deterioration in the perceived quality of life for the 75% people that I described who are the lower 75% income earners. That frustration has converted to being willing to take a jump into the deep end of the pool to say, okay, we're gonna try and uh, shuffle the deck. We're going to change things in Washington dramatically, and we're going to hope that it improves our lot because everything we've done in the past hasn't done that. But I think, unfortunately, they threw their lot in with the notion that an authoritarian government, one that has a sort of uh, unitary executive, the notion of a of an imperial government, an imperial president who can call the shots and unilaterally change things, could work if the unilateral changes were designed to be beneficial to Tom, Dick, and Mary. But if you look at all the executive orders that have been issued and all of the unitary actions that have been taken by the imperial government, it's not aimed at benefiting Tom, Dick, and Mary. I mean, there have been some bones tossed, getting pharmaceutical drugs to be negotiated to lower prices. Well, that's beneficial, but that's not what's breaking the back of people with respect to their healthcare costs. It's it's $25,000 of healthcare premiums and deductibles a year to cover a family. That's what's killing them. Um, and the same is true with respect to healthcare costs. Nothing's being done there to benefit the family with respect to daycare costs or groceries for that matter. I mean, there's talk about making eggs cheaper, and there are these focused efforts. But yeah, maybe if eggs get cheaper, that's good. That's good. But if the whole grocery basket goes up in price, that's what's bad. And and so yeah, I mean, I think what we've gone is to chapter two of frustration with government. And the question is, what are the people going to do, the 75% income earners, lower 75% of income earners who remain frustrated with their lot in life, with the affordability of their life, after a couple of years of this kind of revolutionary change in government? Where will they turn next? And what will the people they turn to do about it to benefit them?
So
And that's
Sandy,
all still to be undone.
let me ask you because you know it's not like it was. You know, you talked about 40 years ago. 40 years ago, Sandy, if people were kind of in a malaise or it was a recession, we were still kind of number one in everything. China wasn't the big elephant in the room that they are now. We were still number one. We still kind of control our own fate. Sandy, we don't control our own fate anymore on the global on the global picture. And so we can't flick a switch anymore. In 6 months, things get better. India, China. There are other nations, Sandy, that have come into the fray that we can't just. It's not just our world anymore. Is it safe to say that?
Well, yeah, and I mean, and the policies at hand, China's had the biggest surplus in trade this year that they've ever had. They've set a record. It isn't all with us, but our our deficit has gone down somewhat, but we still have a very substantial trade deficit that's not going to be cured in the near term at all by the tariff program. And so, yeah, I mean, the world is different today. The world has evolved differently. The current posture of the current administration with respect to world affairs is to focus on the Western Hemisphere and to back out of involvement in the rest of the world. That might be a policy that I could agree with, but it's a significantly different policy than we've had, and it's a demonstration of the fact that the United States can no longer be as dominant in the world as it was 40 and 50 and 60 years ago. And it was never likely that we would be because, post World War II was an accident of history that left the United States standing like the only warrior who didn't have to participate in the war.
So, Sandy, then, and I'm always, listening to your responses, and what comes to mind with me is that is it safe to say that the generations that are ahead of us won't do as well as the generations that you and I have lived in? And barring, I don't know, Sandy, some complete change of the way we do business in this country, the future, and I know you're an optimist, but the future, Sandy, for the generations after us might be a lot more difficult than the ones you and I lived in.
Well, I think they might be more difficult, but they aren't insurmountable difficulties. And if we roll up our sleeves and look at ourselves and carry out something like a strategic plan, we are in a very powerful situation in the world. We have all the tools necessary to have a great deal of prosperity now and in the future if we figure out how to organize ourselves in a manner which gives us the capacity to realize it. And it won't be by simply trying to turn the clock back to a prior period when we in the world were in a different position than we can ever be again in the future. And when the world itself is redesigning itself, change is inevitable. And you better look forward and lean into the change rather than trying to lean backwards and reverse it. And I'm afraid that current policies look an awful lot like that, leaning backwards and reversing. Whereas leaning forward, I mean, there are plenty of countries in the world who are not dominant, don't dominate the world, and who have a great deal of prosperity. I mean, you can look in Northern Europe and almost all of them. And we're talking about how Europe is matured and Europe is on the precipice of no longer being what it was, but actually, the European economies are experiencing very comfortable situations for their population, many of them, and their populations are in fact very happy. And the same is true around the world. Japan has a very powerful economy and has a very happy population who are thriving. So we could be doing that too. We have more complexity. We are the most diverse, ethnically diverse country in the world. We have 350 million people, makes us what, the third largest population country by population in the world. uh, all of these things make it maybe more difficult to steer the ship. But if we do steer the ship in a purposeful and intelligent way, I think the future can be very good.
Well,
But
Sandy, go
it's going
ahead.
to require a different kind of outlook from the outlook that our current political process holds. And
So,
I don't mean
Sandy,
by that the conservatives or the liberals. I mean both the conservatives and the liberals. They have to roll their sleeves up. They have to ignore K Street and the lobbyists much more than they do. and they have to start analyzing and evaluating our strengths, our weaknesses, and our vision for the future and start moving in that direction.
So Sandy, my pushback on it is our vision for the future. We have got grown accustomed to leading, controlling the world. And I don't know if we're ever going to get into a position, Sandy, where you talked about Europe and you talked about Japan, who aren't concerned about controlling the world, having our fingers in every part of this world. Part of our problem, Sandy, is that it's time for us to move away from that. I mean, we can't control the things that we controlled in the past, Sandy. And so it's going to take a mindset change that the American people themselves don't have any control over. We don't have control over that. That's our government. And so do you think that mindset, and this is going back to what you said when you and I first crossed paths and you talked about us not having a plan. Never will forget it. And that plan is missing now. Do you see that even being discussed?
Well, I don't, but I think it's like a psychiatrist would talk to someone who comes in and talks about how unhappy they are, and then they never talk about what makes them unhappy, and the psychiatrist tells them they're in denial. They're
Right.
avoiding facing the truth, and I'm afraid that that's in large part what the American political process spends a great deal of time doing. So when we focus abroad on foreign policy as being the most important thing to focus on, it's really a way of deflecting our attention from ourselves and analyzing what it is in the United States that we need to evaluate, what our problems are, what our strengths are, and how do we play to our strength and solve for our weaknesses. And like I've said a couple of times in the last couple of months, I never thought I'd be agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but uh, you know,
You and I
she's
both.
right. And that now, well, I don't know what America first means to everybody, but my thinking is that what we ought to be thinking about is the American people first, and we ought to be solving the problems that we have here at home, our domestic issues, and we ought to be honest and truthful with ourselves about what our issues are, and then we ought to roll up our sleeves and have an honest debate about how we fix them instead of just applying band-aids and having ideologically based fixes. So that, for instance, and I keep coming back to healthcare because it's obviously systemically one of the things that's most broken in America, which is because it's consuming 20% of our GDP, and it's sort of parasitic rather than productive for the economy, that we need to look at it and decide what's wrong with it. And clearly an aspect of what's wrong with it is people can't afford it. And so in the near term, we have to make sure that people can afford it so that it's available. But in the long term, we have to do the things necessary to make sure that it doesn't continue to become more and more unaffordable.
Sandy, let me ask you, because all of the things that you are saying are right, and it would be nice if we could put Sandy Williams at the top, and Sandy Williams could go to the mountaintop and talk about the things that you and I are talking about. But none of those things can happen unless big business, which has a toehold on Congress, is somehow reined in. So so Congress is not going to rein in big business because of, again, the power that big business has. Then how do we approach this, Sandy? How else can it be fixed unless big business, which is part of the problem, and Congress, which has basically kind of kowtowed to big business, and neither seems to be concerned about what it is you and I are talking about and what the
Uh,
American people are talking about.
Well, I know, and that's, I mean, I've talked about this before, but one of the issues I think a country like America has is that the status quo has all the political power and has all the money to deal with the politicians in the manner that money can affect politics. It's what we have today that has all that power. What we need tomorrow has only the power of the vision of the voters and the vision of those who want to lead us to tomorrow. And that constituency is very fragile and has no might, and particularly has no financial might and a capacity to cause our government to be responsive to the needs of tomorrow rather than being responsive to the situation today. And so the healthcare industry, 20% of the GDP, probably 20% of the employees in this country, a great deal of corporate might involved. 20% of corporate money flows through medical uh, industries that are dependent on the medical industry as it's designed today. These people don't want to change it, okay? And they will spend their money in politics to try and resist anything like a revolutionary change in healthcare. And so, how do we get around that? And that really requires that there be people in in the public eye who see the future and can talk to the people and get the people to get vested in the future rather than being as vested as we are in the status quo, because the status quo is filled with the problems that we have today, right? We have status quo industry, we have status quo uh, a government, and we have status quo problems. And absent changing the status quo, we will continue to have all three of those components as they stand today.
You know, Sandy, when you look at, you know, the amount of people that vote, 60% of eligible Americans voted in the 2020 presidential election. Voter turnout tends to be lower in midterm elections, averaging around 50%. Young voters ages 18 to 29 had a turnout of about 50% in 2020, a significant increase from previous years. Older voters age 65 and older typically have the highest turnout rates, often exceeding 70%. Turnout rates can vary significantly. But what I'm saying to you, Sandy, is the 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 amount of people who are voting, they're giving up, okay? And they're giving up because it doesn't matter who you vote for or put in office, things aren't really changing as much in a positive manner for the American people. That's not a good sign, right? I mean,
No, I
what
mean,
we need
like I
is
said, the frustration with the current government has caused apathy amongst some, anger amongst others. Those who have reacted with anger, most of them have decided, you know what, I'm gonna change the way I voted, because if I'm going to vote and if voting hasn't been beneficial to me, I think I'll pull another lever and see if that helps. And so I would say that that's sort of an explanation of the kind of revolutionary change we've seen in politics in America over the last 20 to 30 years. One, much more anger is reflected in the civility or lack thereof of people who are participating in the political process. They're manifesting the anger. And number two, another way they're manifesting is by making unexpected changes in the way people vote. So, the voting profile of various cohorts in America has changed quite dramatically over the past decade. And I expect that it might continue to be volatile in that regard, because um, anger and frustration is not something that necessarily breeds loyalty to one or the other political party. And I think what it's going to do is create a group of voters who are quite volatile, but are willing to take risks because they aren't seeing the benefit of the course of action, which was the normal course of action that they were following in the past.
You know, Sandy, one of the fears that I have is as your and my generation starts to kind of move on from the scene
Is
because
move
of the
on a
evil,
euphemism, Earl?
because because of the evil consequences of time, the voting part of it is going to be less because you and I and our generation, we've we've realized that the voting we've seen some where voting has made a difference. and as the younger generations, age, they haven't seen what you and I have seen from a time when sometimes voting did change things, right? Um, and so many of them have kind of walked away.
Well, I would say that the vote in 2024 has definitely changed things. Things have changed more dramatically in the last 12 months than I think any period in my lifetime when in terms of political change. The question is whether those changes are perceived as being positive, particularly, and are they perceived as being responsive to the problems which were frustrating the voters and causing them to pull different levers and to react differently in the political environment. And I think that's where uh, there's going to be some disappointment. I don't think that the 75%, the lowest income earners in this country, and by lowest, I mean the lowest 75%, are going to be particularly happy with the changes they're experiencing because that they aren't particularly responsive to, and let's face it, affordability is the issue that Americans face. The living day to day, living paycheck to paycheck is the definition of an affordability crisis. And most of the tension that people experience in their lives relates to their capacity to afford the life they're living or the life they need to live. And if they can't afford it, it's extremely stressful and extremely frustrating and ultimately, I think, can lead to a great deal of anger.
Or Sandy, we're talking about that lower 75% is pretty broad because that upper half of that 75% still a strong middle class, but the lower rung of that is survival mode. Period. Just
Well,
survival.
the median income, we've analyzed this. The median income family in Wisconsin, the median income family in the United States is definitely living paycheck to paycheck. There's almost no geographic area of the country where you can live. The more rural you get, potentially the lower your housing costs, and some of the other costs might also be defrayed. But if you live in anything like a metropolitan area and you are a median income family, you are living paycheck to paycheck and you are struggling. And in fact, you're living paycheck to paycheck, most likely, if you are in the lowest 75% of the income earners in a metropolitan area.
Sandy, it is more than frustrating. It is heartbreaking because there is no magic switch that's going to turn it around. The suffering is going to continue to happen. And as you stated, we're gonna go through this, and um, you know, no quick fixes.
Well, here's the problem. You take the healthcare, and I keep focusing on it because it's such a big element of our economy. The fix to the healthcare system will undoubtedly involve changing from an insured program with third-party payers to something else. That change will dislocate a lot of workers out of the jobs they have in the insurance industry. And so that will have to be addressed governmentally to try and figure out what's the interim, what step do we
Yeah,
take to solve for the crunch that will occur for tens of thousands of workers in the healthcare industry who work in the insurance side of it to get them to their next job. So that's a training. So that will require some kind of comprehensive plan to deal with it. Um, and furthermore, you're going to have to continue to subsidize those on the side of the users of healthcare who can't afford the prices until the healthcare system as revised becomes more affordable. And the system that we've developed, whether it be like the Shanghai system where we rely on health savings accounts and extraordinary healthcare insurance to cover the extraordinary costs or whatever it is, it's going to have to be a plan that gets implemented with compassion to support those who can't afford it without some subsidy, as well as some careful planning to help the people who have dislocated jobs so that the political backlash of job loss is not so great. I mean, You have to figure out a plan that gets you from the status quo to the future in the best possible way. And that will require a very careful plan and a governmental and political process, which is far more functional than the one we have today.
Hey, Sandy, we got to leave it there. Thank you as always, my friend. We'll reconnect soon. Have a great new year and looking forward to seeing you then.
Okay, see you in 2026.
All right.
Yeah.
That's the one and only Sandy Williams. See you later.